Hello and a very warm welcome to all of you on the very first day of Tata Literature Live 2020, the 11th annual Mumbai International Literature Festival and the first one to be completely digital. This year, the festival is co-sponsored by Tata Steel and Tata Projects. I'm Meher Charyadar, I'm your MC for this evening, and my God, what a 2020 it has been. And it doesn't seem like any of the weirdness that this year had to offer is going away anytime soon. Just imagine a literature festival online with speakers and participants and audiences logging in from all over the world at the same time. Heck, I'm sitting in 15 degrees temperature in the Nilgiris with rain pouring outside my window. So what can we say? But, I loved a line I had read earlier this year, that not all storms come to disrupt your life. Some come to clear your path. And we hope that for what it's worth, the storm that has engulfed all of us this year has brought with it clarity, peace, lots of love for all moments great and small, and lots of time to catch up on all those books that you kept saying you'll read on your next holiday. We've had 10 fantastic editions of this festival, and here in its 11th year, we've gone bigger and brighter and much more ambitious than we could have ever thought we would. And we have a prodigious lineup of speakers and events and performances, much more phenomenal than we could have ever imagined in our wildest dreams. This year, we have not 4, but 7 days of the festival, full of thought-provoking sessions in old and new formats, the famous debates, readings, workshops, theatrical and musical performances, book launches, straight talks, and discussions featuring over 100 writers, thought leaders, ideologues, and thinkers from around the globe, and of course, our famous awards. The Tata Literature Live Poet Laureate Award, the Lifetime Achievement Award, Sultan Padamsee Playwriting Award, and of course, the much-awaited Book Awards. So I know that you all will be more than spoiled for choice over the next 7 days. Now, as P.G. Woodhouse says, there is no surer foundation for a beautiful friendship than a mutual taste in literature. And year after year after year, some of our best friends of this festival have unstintingly been the Tata Group, without whom we cannot now even envisage this festival. So once again, a huge thank you to the Tata Group for supporting us over this last decade, and of course to continue to do so in the future. And special mentions to Tata Steel and Tata Projects this year for co-sponsoring our festival. But wait, the most important thank you is to all of you, our ever loyal audience. Thank you so much for making sure this festival can be realized even in its digital avatar. Now, talking about avatars, I'd now like to invite a man with various avatars and always juggling so many hats in the air at the same time. Editor, journalist, founder and festival director of Tata Literature Live, Mr. Anil Dharker. Over to you, Mr. Dharker.
Thank you, Meher. And this is my avatar, as you called it. I hope this avatar is visible to all of you. And welcome to Tata Literature Live, the Mumbai Litfest. Last year was a significant year for the festival because it was the 10th year. This year, the 11th, and significant in another way, as was just mentioned, is the first time that the festival is all digital. It is, as you can see and experience, this year's festival is going to be all online. Obviously, this was not something that we had any choice about. As I stand before you, actually as I sit before you, I do miss the milling crowds at NCPA's Tata Theatre and all the other NCPA auditoriums, which has been home to the festival right from the very start in 2010. We will miss the hubbub at St. Paul's and Tidal Waves in Bandra, and the queues at Prithvi Theatre. Whichever venue we went to, the excitement was almost palpable. I hope wherever you're watching now, it could be your office, your home, but hopefully not your car, you can still feel the same air of excitement excitement and anticipation. Anticipation for a festival that is literary, of course, but is even more a festival of ideas. Ideas that touch upon a huge range of human thought and endeavor. Ideas that enlarge our worldview, perspectives that will widen our horizons, and in the process help us get rid of prejudices and soften any rigidities in our mindsets, which without us knowing have set in. Perhaps we may occasionally admit to ourselves that someone with opinions that are the opposite of ours can be right too. During these nearly 8 months of the pandemic and the resultant lockdown and the isolation that was forced on so many millions of us all over the world, who were our closest companions, our best friends, the ever-present source of comfort? Why, books, of course. I'm sure many of you, like me, found that it was reading that kept us going. It was reading that kept our minds alert and sane, and it was reading that gave us hope of a brighter day. So it's fitting that we hold this festival to celebrate books. It's befitting that through the coming week that starts now and ends on Sunday, 22nd, we will log in and listen to as many as of the 90 sessions that this year's festival, with its 180 participants, will bring to us over the week's 7 days. Last but definitely not the least, I want to thank the Tata Group, which has never faltered in its generous support of our Litfest, your Litfest, right from the very start. Any other group might have said it's been a tough year, both socially and economically, so let's skip the festival just for this year. I can honestly say that that was never once mentioned, even in passing, with my friend Harish Bhatt, whom you'll hear in a minute, or with Atul Agarwal, with whom I have constant contact about the festival. I thank them here personally, and the Tata Group for its belief in the value of culture and literature and the arts, and the steadfast support they give it every year for so many years. I also want to thank the other people who always support this festival and have done so even in this difficult year. Formally, I should call them sponsors, but I think that's belittling them. They are what I would call true friends who help when it really matters. And finally, although I may be the face of the festival, something of this magnitude needs team effort. The Literature Live team is a little band that works with dedication to put together this feast for the mind that now awaits you. I thank each member, as well as the members of the youthful QTP and Digital Dabba and Mehul teams that form the backbone of Tata Literature Live, the Mumbai Litfest. And I want to thank Jaya from Tata, who is always there for us. And most of all, thank you all. All the very many people in the audience that I can't unfortunately see, but I know are there. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Dharker. I'd now like to invite in the spotlight Mr. Harish Bhatt, the brand custodian of Tata Sons and a veteran of many Tata companies as their director and MD, who's played a key role in building many iconic Tata brands in his day job. But he's also an author, a columnist, he relishes the written word and loves spinning a good story. Presenting Mr. Harish Bhatt.
Thank you very much. Mr. Anil Dharker, Festival Director of Tata Literature Live, distinguished authors and writers, and to all of you who are gathered here in your homes or in your offices or in the parks outside, everyone lovers of art and the written word. It is my pleasure and privilege to speak to you here today representing the Tata Group. At the Tata Group, it's our absolute privilege to be associated with Tata Literature Live, the Mumbai Litfest. This has become one of the finest literary festivals anywhere, and we are so proud of that. Let me begin, therefore, by extending my heartiest congratulations to Anil Dharker, founder and festival director of Tata Literature Live, the Mumbai Litfest, and his passionate team. I must tell you, they curate Tata Lit Live so wonderfully well, with so much passion, so much energy, so much commitment and dedication every single year. And year after year, Anil and his team exceed themselves in bringing this wonderful city, and today the entire world, one of its most eagerly awaited annual events. I know it's difficult. In an auditorium, I would be requesting you to give Anil and his team a big round of applause. But may I request that all of us, wherever we are seated watching this event today, to give Anil and his team a rapturous ovation in your own homes or offices. And I'm going to pause for 10 seconds to enable all of you to do that. Ladies and gentlemen, as we open the 11th edition of Tata Literature Live today, I want to hark back to the mission of the Tata Group, which is to improve the quality of life of all the communities that we operate in. This year, with the challenges that COVID-19 and the pandemic have posed, Mr. Ratan Tata, Chairman of the Tata Trust, and Mr. N. Chandrasekharan, Chairman of Tata Sons, have announced significant efforts by the Tata Group to fight the pandemic. And those efforts make very good progress. At the same time, in the Tata Group, we are convinced that art and literature are also essential contributors to elevating the quality of our lives. Literature is beautiful and magical. It provokes us with ideas. It takes us on flights of imagination, and it makes us much better human beings, thereby adding significantly to the quality of our lives. I would submit to all of you that this is even more important in a pandemic with all its anxieties and concerns, where literature and a festival of ideas deliver light, hope, and imagination, keeping our faith intact in the future of humanity and inspire us with the power of possibilities. That is why we persist with Tata Literature Live, though in a digital format this year, to align with the safety norms that govern us today. Permit me to take a couple of minutes to narrate two interesting stories to you, since Meher has called me a storyteller. The Tata Group is 152 years of age today, and we have lived through at least two pandemics. In the 1890s, the Tata Group, which was founded in 1868, in 1890s lived through the bubonic plague. The bubonic plague devastated Mumbai. Millions of people ran away from the city of Mumbai, and the city was down on its knees. Jamshedji Tata, who founded the Tata Group, wanted to bring visitors back to Mumbai and wanted a new, glamorous, modern face of Mumbai which could attract visitors back to the financial capital of India. And do you know what he did, ladies and gentlemen, to enable that? He went and leased out a 5-acre plot of land from the Mumbai Port Trust, and upon it he constructed the grand Taj Mahal Hotel. The first hotel in the city to have electricity, to have air conditioning systems driven by ice, Turkish baths, spun iron pillars from Paris, the grand face of the new city recovering from the bubonic plague which got visitors back to the city. The Taj Mahal Hotel has been featured in over 90 books, travelogues, books of fiction, books of non-fiction. The best-selling Night in Bombay by Louis Bromfield was based in the Taj Mahal Hotel. Sarojini Naidu, the Nightingale of India, wrote many of her pieces in the Taj Mahal Hotel. The great English writer Somerset Maugham enjoyed his stay in the Taj Mahal Hotel and thought of many of his ideas sitting in the rooms of the Taj. But a few years later, there was the Spanish flu in the 1910s, late 1910s. And after the Spanish flu had nearly concluded by 1919, in 1920, the second chairman of the Tata Group, Dorabji Tata, the son of Jamshedji, did something remarkable. He wanted to once again inspire India like Jamshedji Tata had inspired the city of Mumbai with the Taj Mahal Hotel. So he sponsored India's very first team to the Olympics in 1920. And this team went to the Antwerp Olympics of 1920, largely sponsored by Dorabji Tata, 3 runners and 2 wrestlers. They did not win any medals this year, but he was instrumental in sending a team back in 1924. And in 1927, he became the founder president of the Indian Olympic Association. And of course, in 1928, the team that went to the Amsterdam Olympics from India won India's first hockey gold medal. That was again a moment of inspiration for India, coming on the back of the Spanish flu pandemic. Even as this pandemic is upon us, just yesterday Tata Steel has kicked off the 7th edition of Samvad, the Pan-India Tribal Conclave, which celebrates tribal culture across the country. So in many more ways than one, I am sure that Tata Literature Live, the 11th edition of the Mumbai Litfest, is going to inspire all of us with the writers, the authors, and the festival of ideas that all of you will be witness to over the next 7 days. Ladies and gentlemen, yesterday was the festival of Diwali in India, and I wrote a small poem to mark the spirit of Diwali. Permit me to read out the first few lines of that poem as I end my brief address. There's a very special place for light when the golden sun is out of sight. A single ray can light a heart, so life can sit up and restart. There's a very special place for light, however slim, however bright. May the Tata Litfest, the Mumbai Litfest 2020 bring many such beautiful, inspiring rays of light into all our lives over the next 7 days. A very happy Diwali, and please enjoy yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those wonderful words, Mr. Bhatt. That was lovely. And now on to the very first event of this year's festival that you all have been waiting for, the enduring power of words. Ian McEwan live in conversation with Anil Dharker. Now, words don't come easily to the best of writers. As Dan Satterfield says in The 13th Tale, there is something about words. In expert hands, manipulated deftly, they take you prisoner, wind themselves around your limbs like spider silk, and when you are so enthralled that you cannot move, they pierce your skin, enter your blood, numb your thoughts, inside they work their magic. And who would know this better than the magician of prose and the weaver of words, who the Times featured on the 50 greatest British writers since 1945. He's a Booker Prize-winning author who has written many screenplays as well as the libretto for an opera. He is one of UK's best-known writers and is one of the most powerful voices in British culture. Please join me in welcoming Ian McEwan to this year's Tata Literature Live 2020. Joining him in conversation will be our founder and festival director, Mr. Anil Dharker. Now, you too can be an important part of the session. How, you may ask? Well, do remember that you can contribute your questions for the question and answer session that will happen at the end of their session, and you can do that right through this session by writing in your chat boxes or in the comment boxes of the platform that you are viewing this on. So type in your questions, send us your names, and we'll be so happy to put them up to both our panelists at the end of the session. And remember, you can do that right through this session. So here it is, the very first session of Tata Literature Live 2020, the enduring power of words. Over to you, Mr. Dharker.
Thank you, Meher. Hello, Ian.
Hello, greetings. Happy Diwali.
Happy Diwali. So, slightly intimidating, isn't it? All these technical bits which we will have to go through.
Yes, I was relieved to see you was as baffled as I was. So I think we're in the same camp.
Though we've been doing events right from the lockdown, which started in March, we have been doing kind of weekly events. This is first time that we are doing it on this scale, and the technical aspects defeat me. Though my first training was an engineer, but I've forgotten that part of my life completely. Have you been doing many digital events in England?
Not many. I did a few at the beginning of lockdown, but I'm in the middle of writing a book, and I really wanted to retreat into the private space, which is actually very well suited to the isolation that has been forced upon us.
Yeah. Actually, I think the lockdown has probably impacted writers the least, and perhaps because writers do this always. They live in isolation, they sit in their study and they write, and that's what you continue doing.
My life has been one long lockdown, and I rather worry for passionate readers of literature. In about 2 years' time, there's going to be a tsunami of books to read, and they'll be longer than usual.
So this book you're writing, does it have the pandemic in it, or does it not?
Mercifully not. My view of public events largely is that they take a while to kind of filter through one's consciousness, and we rely on good reportage and journalists for the immediate response.
Yeah.
No, I'm sure it will happen at some point in my writing, but not immediately.
Yes. Actually, it is quite odd that the bubonic plague, which hit England and hit it for many, many years and killed a lot of people. During that time, Shakespeare was quite prolific, and he was in a lockdown. And I don't think he mentioned it except to use the phrase "a plague on both your houses."
Plague on both your houses, yes.
Yeah, but he wrote his 3 great tragedies at that time. I think probably Macbeth and Othello. I can't remember which, but I know he wrote great tragedies, and I'm sure it was the effect of the plague that he didn't write a comedy.
No, these were not very funny times. I mean, Shakespeare had that sort of magic time at the very beginning of the 17th century when some of those great plays were written, right up to Macbeth, his most extraordinary and shortest play. And I'm sure that he probably shared that sense that it would take him a few years to really assimilate the effects of it.
Yeah. But will your book, which you're writing now, be dark because of what the world is going through?
Well, I think it's a good question, because there's no avoiding the fact that the mood tone, even if you're not actually addressing the matter directly, the mood tone of public events, and we've had a bad year, we have to face it.
Yeah.
The chaos in American politics, which has a huge effect on the rest of the world, climate change clearly, and now COVID-19 has really sort of darkened moods, I think. And the best humor, I think, has probably been dark humor.
Yes, absolutely.
A sort of gallows humor I notice among my literary friends, at least when I talk to them on the phone. So yes, the mood tone does get shaped by the times, even if you're trying to bury yourself in something else.
Yeah. Talking of gallows humor, I remember I think the best gallows joke I've heard, where this prisoner being led to the gallows by his jailer, and they walk and they walk and they walk, and this prisoner says, "Well, that's a long walk, isn't it?" And the jailer says, "You're a fine one to complain. You don't have to walk back."
Very good.
Right. So, Ian, you've got such a huge body of work, so I don't know if we start talking of all your books, it's going to take a long time. I just want to concentrate on 2 of them, which is Saturday and Machines Like Us.
Right.
Machines Like Me, which I really love both these books. Of course, we could talk of Atonement and Amsterdam. But let me begin by asking you an unfair question of an author, which is your favorite book?
Well, I used to avoid that question because I would say, well, it's like asking someone which is your favorite child.
Right.
But I've come around to speaking up for a book of mine which is not so much read, written in the early 90s, called Black Dogs. It's about a man trying to juggle his sort of rational scientific passions with his more spiritual side. And it's a reflection too on the mid-century in Europe, the Second World War, the Holocaust, and asks the question of whether this can return, whether this virus of anti-Semitism and xenophobia could ever come back. And lately, that novel has been on my mind a bit more, as we've seen the rise of quite a lot of sort of racist subgroups and something darker in the European political and cultural world re-establishing itself.
Yes.
But, you know, I picked up I had to look something up in Saturday not so long ago, and I'd completely forgotten, as one does, the pages, and I remain pleased with it. I stand by it, and certainly with machines like me. It's amazing how once you get, well, I've now been writing for 50 years, and sometimes I pick up some old book of mine, and it's almost like reading another author. An author that I might like on one page and not like so much on another. Sometimes my hand twitches for the blue pencil, and I say, oh, especially in my writing in my early 20s, when I fell under the spell of this writer or that writer, Beckett here, Philip Roth there, and I want to revise. But my view, very much unlike, say, W.H. Auden's view, is that what you did at the time is part of the story and you have to stand by it.
Right.
Don't change a thing, don't look back.
Well, a poet could probably go back and revise his poems if he wanted to, but I don't think a novelist can actually do that.
No, it's cheating. Definitely cheating.
But have you found any book of yours really bad that you're embarrassed by?
No, I sometimes read my very early stories published in the 1970s and wonder at how dark they are when I was having the time of my life. I mean, why did not any of that high spirits and fun and adventure find its way into my stories? So I give myself a little retrospective telling off there.
So were you deliberately trying to appear as a serious novelist, perhaps to impress your peer group, and you didn't want to write a light novel because they may not take you seriously? Do you think that had something to do with it?
A little bit of that. I was only, I was in my early 20s, and I think I wanted to be a kind of fauviste. I wanted to shake things up. I wanted to be dark and outrageous and really explore the underside of human nature. And it took a good while, really, for me to begin to embrace all of my interests and bring all of my interests into my work. So it was not, not until my novel, The Child in Time, did I allow myself my interest in history and science and politics to begin to shape what I did. But it was writing short stories was for me a kind of laboratory. I could write my way through my influences, the people who seemed to be pressing in on me, telling me how to conduct myself on the page. And also I could afford to fail. And I'm always telling younger writers, start with a short story, waste 6 weeks on it rather than 3 years. The short story is a perfect place to fail. It's a very hard form to do. The great practitioners can take our breath away with their technique. But for a young writer who is just beginning to stretch her or his talents and capabilities, it's a great way to just begin to explore and throw off all the other writers that stand around and find your own way.
Yes, and you can go back and revise, keep revising. It's a short story. And to do that in a novel, I think it's will take so much more time. I can see that, yeah.
I always want to get on to the next thing.
Sorry?
I always want to get on to the next thing, not go back.
Okay.
Anyway.
I believe J.K. Rowling, when she finishes a book in the morning, she starts on the next one in the same evening.
All right, she and Trollope. I mean, the famous story of Trollope is that he just draw a line. If he hadn't finished his novel at the bottom of the page, he would just draw a line and on the same page begin the next one. I'm the complete opposite. I'm very good at not writing. I sort of mulch. I muse. I stop writing sometimes for months on end between books. I very much enjoy it at that time. It's a time for reading, traveling, maybe doing some literary festivals, and becoming a slightly different person, actually. Becoming, just getting back in touch with, the deeper currents of thought that will sooner or later start you off on something new.
Yes. But when you start a new book, do you start with an idea in mind, then you start researching it and reading about it? Or is it a much more spontaneous kind of thing, something that comes to you as a kind of almost like a God-given gift, and then you have to work on it? I'm not saying that it comes too easily. I'm sure writing doesn't come too easily to anyone. But do you labor over an idea, or does the idea happen?
I keep a fairly large notebook. It always has to have a green cover. And in there, I write in longhand. It's a great liberation from the keyboard. And somehow that sensual feeling of just being back with a pen on a blank page gets me in touch with things that surprise me. But then I realize quite rapidly connect with other things that have been on my mind that I've forgotten or dismissed, and slowly one gets back in touch with a kind of unconscious mind. Right. And sooner or later, I will find myself writing a paragraph and I'll stare at it and I think, there's something in there for me. There's something rich in there. I can't quite explain to myself. I don't even want to quite explain to myself what it is, but I'm going to write the next paragraph. And it's almost as if I just sort of write myself into the things that have been sort of slightly under the surface. And slowly, I would have something which I then either discard because I think it's an impasse, a cul-de-sac, or I stay with it. And that's how I sort of coax myself in. I'm a very slow starter at getting into things. And I'd say that I need to give myself maybe 20,000 words, 25,000 words before I say, okay, I'm committed. I marry this project. I give it myself. I know for the next 2, 3, 4 years, this is where I'll be.
But that's a lot of words to...
That's a lot of words, yeah. But it's enough to know that you do want to live here. I mean, I think all novelists halfway through, maybe a third of the way through, think maybe I'm making a colossal mistake. But I've come so far that I have to finish, but it's going to be no good. And those are the night thoughts that can torment us. But there is a plateau, which I love in writing a novel, when the novel has taught you how to write itself. It won't teach you how to write the next novel. You have to treat it as if it's your first novel. But by then, maybe halfway, 2/3 the way through, you know these characters, you know the kind of prose that you need to deliver the thoughts you have. You know more or less where you're heading. And there's only one person in the world who can finish this novel, and it's you. It's your own. It's your secret. I don't talk about it much, except in general, evasive terms to anyone else. But that's a lovely moment. And I think I'm just on the edge of that moment this week. So I'm feeling a bit lighter.
We've got you in a good mood, that means.
You got me. There's a spring in my step. I feel that I've got on top of this material.
Right. Tell me this green notebook that you keep when you write down your thoughts.
Yeah, it's here. Look, can you see it?
Ah, okay.
And it's green.
It's green. Okay. Any significance to the color?
The first one I bought was green, and it worked well. So I thought I'm not going to trust another color. A red one would be ruinous, I know. And forget blue.
You don't want to try a red one.
Oh no, it'll be the end of you.
No, okay.
No, if it works once, you just got to stick with it.
Okay. The question I was asking was, when you write these thoughts are they random, or do you, when you start looking back, you find that there is a pattern in them which leads you to your book?
It's the pattern that I hope for and look for. Sometimes it's just the middle of a scene. It suddenly grabs me. I write a scene, and it turns out maybe it will never show in the novel itself, or it will be halfway through, or sometimes it is the beginning. You mentioned atonement. I remember I took my two sons, they were 7 and 9 years old, to some sort of holiday camp where they could go off in the mornings and just do whatever they like, archery and swimming and so on. And I knew I had 2 hours, and I just started writing a paragraph. I don't know where it came from, but it was the beginning of atonement. A woman runs into a room. She has some flowers that she's just picked. She's looking for a vase. There's a young man, a gardener, out in the garden. She's bothered by him. She wants to talk to him. She doesn't want to talk to him. She's a bit confused. And I knew this connected to something, and I didn't know what it was. I still didn't know. Even 2 months later, I just finished a chapter that started like that. And then slowly it all opened out. And it all connected to other things that I've been thinking about for a year or two beforehand.
No, but the scene you described, was it something you had actually seen, or was it just something that came into your mind?
It just came, but it carried some weight with me, which, as I said before, I just couldn't quite explain. Sometimes one gets lucky. I mean, a friend of mine who was an appeal court judge, very distinguished figure, told me a story of a case he had presided over. And even as he was halfway through his account, I thought, this is a short novel. I have to write this. And that was The Children Act. But those are rare, those moments. I mean, I wish... and I thought, well, if I just spent my time with judges at the family court who are dealing with so many human problems, I could probably get 20 novels that way. But life is never quite so smooth.
Right. You were talking of writing 20,000 words before you know you really got it.
Yes.
That you want to commit yourself for the next few months to working on that book. But have you ever abandoned something after 20,000 words?
I've abandoned things at around 10 or 12. Usually, I mean, I have a little sort of inner storm of doubt around about 20,000 words, and I generally press on, but I am ready to press the cancel button. So yeah, but sometimes those ideas or some version of them come back, in disguise, right. And they get redeemed in the end.
But have you gone back to those discarded 20,000 words after a gap of a few years and said, hey, why did I abandon this? This could work.
Yes. I wrote a novel called Sweet Tooth about a young woman. Part of the story is that she's falling in love with this man through his stories, and we're reading those stories over his shoulder. So I raided not only some published stories, but some abandoned stories of mine from 30 years ago, and gave them life so that this young woman could read them. So yes, I mean, It's odd how, I mean, I said earlier that I've read, look back at some of my work and I'm surprised, but it also lives in one continuous, constant present tense, everything you've ever done. And nothing reminds you of that more than when you go to a literary festival and someone is asking questions, quite detailed questions of something you did 40 years ago, and you find, you respond. It's become in a kind of eternal present for you. So similarly, all the discarded things are also just there at the elbow. They can be retrieved. They're in a green notebook somewhere.
Wonderful. In Saturday, you begin with a quotation from Saul Bellows Herzog, which after you read the book and you go back to the quotation, it makes sense as to why you use that quotation. So, did the quotation come first or did it come later?
It came about halfway through. It's a moment in, I think, one of Saul Bellows' greatest novels, Herzog,
yes,
when in a typical wonderful aside, Moses Herzog goes to wash his hands before dinner. And there is this wonderful meditation, which is also a kind of manifesto of Saul Bellows. And I suppose it was really a kind of prompt for me. He says, that one of the great things of literature, this is what I'm slightly reading into this quotation, is to give us the responsibility of confronting now what it is to be a man or a woman in a century, in modernity, in a city, in a condition of pressure, of time and conflict. It's a sort of magnificent call to arms, if you like, of writers to not simply always be writing in kind of dissociated, alienated ways about characters who are sort of nowhere in particular, in no time in particular. Sometimes you must just embrace your condition and the condition of your modernity. I think it's a fabulous manifesto. It catches something of the gift Saul Bellows had for giving us the lovely rhythms of a thoughtful man reflecting on his times and his relationships and everything else. And that did become something of it embodied for me what I was trying to do with Saturday.
Saul Bellows is supposed to have put a lot of himself in many of his books.
Yes.
Have you done that with your books?
Well, I did it with Saturday more than... I just moved to London back in 2001, 2002. And I thought, well, I'm so enjoying being back in London. I've been in Oxford for many years. So I put my house, this new house, in it. I put one of my sons in the novel. I put my wife in the novel. I put some of my own thoughts, but many of them are not my thoughts. I gave myself, as it were, another career as a neurosurgeon. There was a big hospital just 5 minutes walk away, so I attached myself to a neurosurgeon. And after a while, I began to go to his operations. I'd be in my scrubs. I'd be quite a familiar person there. I was many mornings while he was performing the most extraordinary things. I saw every day a living brain, one of the most extraordinary things I've ever seen, a thinking object right at the end of your fingers. I even touched one with a gloved finger. And I really I thought myself into the role of a neurosurgeon. And in fact, one day, a couple of students knocked on the theatre door, and they came in and said, since I was standing back from the operating table, they said, "Excuse us, doctor, do you mind if we come and watch?" And I said, "Oh, by all means." And they said, "Would you mind telling us what this operation is about?" And I thought, if I cannot do this, and if I cannot pass myself off as a neurosurgeon to these two young medical students, I'm not worthy of writing this novel. So I said, come over to the light box, and there are all the CT scans. And I said, well, we are clipping an aneurysm on the middle cerebral artery, and we're taking the famous route of a Canadian neurosurgeon. And here you can see, and this is where we are. And I explained for about 10 minutes the entire operation. At the end, they said, well, thank you very much, doctor. And they left. And I always wondered how they did in their exams, because had they known they were getting advice from or instruction from a novelist, I think they would have screamed in horror. But anyway, that was a high moment of my deep involvement in research for that novel. And I hadn't even started at that point.
I think anyone reading Saturday and about Dr. Henry Perron, the neurosurgeon, will be struck by the detail you've gone into, the medical detail, and you describe an operation in such detail as if you are a surgeon. It's quite incredible. And how long did you actually spend on? Did you spend months on learning about it?
No, I spent almost 2 years. But for a good part of that, I was writing the novel and spending time in the operating theatre. So the research somewhat dictated the flow of the novel. It wasn't like researching and then writing.
Right.
And I also took the view that if you're going to be free with a subject, you need to know 10 times what you're ever going to put on the page, so that you can move around in a relaxed way. I became very good friends with the neurosurgeon, Neil Kitchen, a remarkable man. I mean, I think that at times I work hard, but then I realized that I didn't know the true meaning of hard work. This was a man who would be at the hospital 5:36 in the morning. He's doing rounds. He's meeting the ethical committee. He's getting ready for the whole day's operations. At the end, he has administration. He has to go back on the rounds again. Then he runs home, 2 miles up from the centre of London. Then he's got there two young children. His wife is a cancer nurse, very senior figure. I never knew a man with such a crowded life. And he would be on his feet all day. And no doubt, because he was such a good runner, he could do it. After being there, I would get there at 7. By lunchtime, and when I say lunchtime was about 3 minutes long from a sandwich out of a machine. By lunchtime, my feet were just like swelling and aching from standing. So I had huge admiration for him and his team of surgeons and nurses and so on, and anaesthetists.
Did you feel that as a novelist you were overawed by this person who not only worked so hard, but had the power of life and death, which you as a novelist don't have?
No, thank goodness novelists don't have the power of life and death. They have the power of boredom and enchantment. That's about the limits, I'd say. I did. I tell you what I envied was working in a team, watching someone with this sort of handful of men and women around him. They were all, he wasn't like an old-fashioned physician, with the three-piece suit and grand manner. He was very direct with everyone. He treated them all as equals. They sort of knew each other's thoughts. As he put his hand out, the thing would be there that he wanted. Just a grunt would say something to the anaesthetist that I didn't understand. And I realized that all of us have these moments of extreme happiness when we're completely engaged. And it can happen to writers. Those 2 or 3 hour stretches where you don't even know you exist, where time stops, where you're completely in the task. That pleasure is even heightened when it's a whole team of people doing the same thing, I thought. So I envied him that. And I thought of him almost as an artist. And at one stage in the novel, mean, he was constantly correcting my mistakes. I sent him pages, and he'd say, "You're very good, but." So he says, at one point, you have the surgeon dip a paintbrush in betadine solution, which is very yellow, sort of antiseptic, and paint it on the patient's skull. Now, I wanted that sense of him being an artist. He said, "We never use a paintbrush, for goodness sake. We use a sponge on a clamp." And I was so reluctant to get rid of the paintbrush. And I battled with myself, but I thought, no, my duty is to the actual. So I put a sponge in, but most reluctantly.
That the area you write about, the University of London, is something I know because I was a student there. And yes, and you mentioned the Indian Students' Hostel. Well, I spent my first 6 months in England in that hostel. So I know Fitzroy Square, I know Gower Street, I know University Street. They're all so familiar.
Well, I often used to go to the youth hostel for, it's one of the best curries in town, incredibly cheap and very nice atmosphere.
Yeah, true. You also write in Saturday about a squash game, which the surgeon plays in great detail. Again, as someone who knows the game pretty thoroughly.
Yes.
So are you a squash player yourself?
Yes, I was. I mean, the problem is, I don't know, perhaps you still play, but you cannot play social squash. Once there's just two of you in this arena, what's so brilliant about the game is you forget everything else. Everything is down to just this. And it has a gladiatorial quality in which, yes, all aggression is wonderfully channeled into its structure. And so against the background of the colossal aggression of the Iraq War, I thought this contained aggression between the surgeon and his anaesthetist would be like a kind of microcosm of a battlefield in which no one is hurt, except feelings and pride, of course. But yes, I was a mediocre squash player for many, many years. I gave up sometime in my early 60s. I thought, if I keep up this, I will have a heart attack. And then in my late 60s, maybe I was almost 70, I had a game with my son, and but I made sure I stopped every 5 minutes, leaned against the wall, and he beat me, I have to say, I think for the first time. But I think anyone who plays squash too late in life is asking for trouble, really.
Yeah, they do.
Tennis is another matter, but squash, tennis, you can stand on the baseline and you can play it into your 80s, I think.
Well, they advise you not to play after you're 50 or so. It's a game you appreciate only if you played it. And I did play. I played at university quite a bit. So I know how tough it is, especially those shots which hug the wall and go right at the backhand corner. And how do you get the ball across? And I watched people like Jamshed Khan playing.
Yeah.
And they make it look so damn easy that for the spectator who doesn't know the game, it's very boring because they're just reaching everything and pushing it back. So
it's not a spectator game, unlike tennis. The ball is so fast, the TV camera can never quite pick it up. So yeah, but there is something of great interest, I think, to a novelist in the whole idea of structured contest, in which all kinds of currents of emotion are flowing: pride, aggression, shame, and a special kind of self-loathing when you make a mistake, which which is constant in all sports, I suppose. But in squash, the shot that you fail at, and it reminds me a little of the process of writing. All those, the good day, the bad day, the good morning, the two sentences that please you, the ones that drive you crazy and make you hate yourself for a minute or two on end. So there was some relation, at least, between writing this contest and also feeling it was a contest about writing itself. You know, somehow writing the game was suggesting the game of writing to me.
Right. So on a bad day, when you're having a bad day at writing, do you just give up for the day, or do you soldier on?
I keep going. I have pretty strict rules about this writing. You've got to turn up, however you feel, 7 days a week, and you must stay there at least 4 or 5 hours, even if it's not coming. Then I think there's time to walk away, to read, or even empty the dishwasher, or just do something else. Being with children, when my children were young, that was a great resource.
Right.
To just enter their world, get out of one's own.
Yeah.
But reading, of course, and hiking. I do a lot of hiking.
Sure. Now, Saturday takes place in just one day in the surgeon's life. But it's told from the point of view of the protagonist completely. And in Machines Like Me, again, it's really one person's view. Now, Saturday is written in the third person. Machines Like Me is written in the first person. Now, at what stage do you choose whether to write in the first person or the third person? Is it something which, again, is quite spontaneous, or do you have to think it through to say that, no, it's better told from the outside rather than the person talking about himself?
It's an important question you raised. I mean, I think the material dictates first or third. My default position is third. I'm a little suspicious. I've written novels in the first person, but my standing position on this is that one must be very suspicious of the first person. I notice around me, I'm reading quite a lot of novels by younger writers. I think it's maybe beginning to fade a bit, but too many are so subjective that you cannot fully judge the prose. In other words, when you write in the third person, you really lay yourself on the line. You make declarative sentences about the world. They're not always filtered through the eyes of this or that character. In the first person, you could excuse all your prose. You say, well, that's simply my character. And it's a screen behind which I think mediocrity could flourish. So I think naming the world, trying to get a handle on the world for the reader in the third person is the bolder thing to do. I say this, and yet many fine novels are written in the first, of course. What's great about the third person is that you have a freedom. You can also, through something called free indirect style, enter the mind of a character and still be writing in the third person, but filter it through that person's thoughts and feelings. So I've written in the first, I've written in the third, but my heart remains, and actually my brain remains with the third. It's the bolder position. It's the braver position.
So why did you choose the first person for Machines Like Me?
Yeah, it's a good question. I wanted one person to be gauging himself against this artificial human. I didn't want the temptations of allowing myself to enter the mind of Adam, my robot. I wanted to share with the reader our wonder and bafflement if we ever got to the point of creating a completely lifelike human who was actually a machine. And I wanted to go through the puzzlement if this was a really brilliant machine and had responses like ours and looked just like us, of what it would be like to be in the dialogues with such a pseudo person, always wondering whether you can take this person seriously or not. So I wanted to sort of live it, and I wanted to live it for myself. I wanted to sort of put myself in the hands of, or in the eyes and minds of my my narrator when he brings home and unwraps this figure, Adam.
Right. You have Charlie, Miranda, Adam as that robot. And there's a very interesting character called Maxfield. Now, is Maxfield, was it based on a real writer or a poet or
No, completely imaginary.
Completely.
Yeah. It's like one of these, sometimes in the morning, a character can just walk onto the page and you think, yeah, he's here to stay.
I've heard some writers say that the characters take over and they guide you as a writer about where they want to go. And if someone actually once said to me that they wanted to kill off a character
yes.
in the book, and that character resisted. So that seemed to me to be a bit far-fetched, because after all, the characters come out of the writer's mind. So
yeah, I never buy this. I mean, D.H. Lawrence famously said, you try and nail down a character and he just walks off with a floorboard on his foot. I take the godly view. You create these characters much as we might create a robot, and you are responsible for them, and you're in charge of them, and you direct them. If you're doing them well, it gets easier to do. It's as simple as that. I think if they're coming to life for you, if you've made them real for you, they open up some options for you. A kind of freedom is generated in a character. But you've got to stay on top of your material.
Right. In Machines Like Me, you've invented these robots, Adam and Eve, who are absolutely like human beings. They not just look the part, but they are made for, I think, they're supposed to be your sparring partner, friend, a factotum. They do the dishes and the bed, but they also think. They can converse with you on any subject. They learn very quickly and so on. So in a way, this is very futuristic because we are not at that stage anywhere yet. But you set the book in the autumn of the 20th century.
Yes.
So you're not setting it in the future, but you're setting it actually a bit in the past.
Yeah.
And you've got an alternate reality because Sir Alan Turing is very much alive. And the Falklands War has been lost. Now, why did you do all this? Were you just amusing yourself? Or?
Yeah, certainly. I had fun with it, I have to say, and confess. And a perverse wish to not make this a novel that's predicting anything. I really just wanted the existential problem of what it would be to deal with a machine, or a machine that could even fall in love and write poetry. By putting it in the past, I wanted to sort of unfix it, let it float free. By altering the past, I wanted to enter into a kind of long meditation about how easily so much of our social, political, personal lives could be other than what they are. We wait for the announcement of a winner of an election. We know that we're rather like the figure in the Borges story, The Garden of the Forking Paths. We could be going down this route or that. Once we're down it, it has that inevitable feel. But I wanted to play with the idea of how easily we could have lost the Falklands War. If the Argentinians had been in touch earlier with the French to prime their Exocet missiles, our battleships would have been sunk. The consequences would have been Mrs. Thatcher would not have won her second general election. The fascist regime in Argentina would have sustained itself for longer. All kinds of things branch out from these points of change. And so the Beatles, John Lennon is not shot. Their album the new album is absolutely terrible. It has like the Moody Blues orchestral backing. It became, I mean, I have to admit that I had to restrain myself. Once you start this, I mean, it's a parlor game that we could all play, the what if. But I wanted that contingency. So, because the central contingency for the purposes of discussing artificial minds was, what if Alan Turing, the great computer scientist who laid some of the foundations of the computers we use today, what if he had not killed himself in 1954? What if he had gone on, he's a gay man, what if he had gone on to enjoy the sexual liberation of the 60s, continued his work, solved many of the problems? Maybe our computer world would be entirely different. So it was integral to having Turing, a 70-year-old in this novel, that I started tinkering with alternate realities. What if, you know, our what ifs are so much? I mean, what if your mother had stayed in to wash her hair and had not met your father at a little party or a dinner? You wouldn't exist.
Yes.
I mean, your half-brother or sister might exist. Your father would have other children. Your mother would have had other children. You wouldn't exist at all. We are all accidents. All of us are accidents. Among my acquaintance, friendships, nearly everyone I know met their wives and husbands at university. Well, think of all the contingent little matters that affected your choice of university. The tiny things that could have made you choose this place or that place. Then you wouldn't have met this wife, this husband. So it starts with the personal thing of how easy it would be to be someone else or to not exist at all, and branches out into our politics. What if Trump doesn't leave the White House? What if Nancy Pelosi becomes acting president and orders in the federal agents to remove a trespasser? These what ifs are astonishing.
Yes. Yeah, you could have written, if you're writing it now, you probably have had Trump losing to Hillary Clinton, and imagine that scenario.
Yeah. Or imagine if Gore had triumphed over Bush. We might not have had we certainly would not have had the Iraq War.
Right.
And we might have done something about climate change a little better than we are doing it now. So many things hinge on quite small things too.
I remember while you were speaking about a short story, I think it was Roald Dahl, writes about this woman in Germany who's going to have a child, and she's being persuaded to abort it. And she fights that and wants to go through the pregnancy, and fighting all the oppositions, she has the child. And her name is Mrs. Hitler. And the child is called Adolf. So.
Yeah, Mrs. Schicklgruber, I think her name was. No one could say Heil Schicklgruber, though. That would have been the end, I think, of the Third Reich. It never would have got started if Hitler had kept his actual name.
Yes.
Yes. And no doubt one could say if Mrs. Einstein had not met Mr. Einstein, we never would have general theory of relativity. So much flows, good people and bad people.
Right.
What accidents led to the birth of Alexander the Great? I mean, we could...
You could go on, yes.
Yeah.
before we go to the Q&A session, I just wanted to make one observation, which is that in a Saturday, and I have the paperback here. The first section is 51 pages long, and all that actually happens in those 51 pages is that your neurosurgeon gets up early in the morning, looks out of the window, he has a spring in the air, etc., and he opens the window and is looking out, and suddenly he sees this plane which has caught fire, which is about to land at Heathrow, and it's a plane on fire. And I thought to myself that in 51 pages, nothing else really happens, right? Now, if you were a writer of, let's say, airport fiction, you would have probably finished that off in 3 or 4 pages. So, is this what distinguishes what one calls literary fiction from what one would call popular fiction?
Yes, I mean,
that it takes something which is not necessarily action, but takes place in the mind, because
you say nothing much happens, but of course Henry Perron is doing a lot of thinking.
Yes.
So we are being invited to think with him, and the country is on the edge of war. Yes. So there are many thoughts about that. And also his profession, his children, his house, his life is flowing through it. And this is where I come back to your very usefully evoked moment from Saul Bellow. He's basically inviting the reader to grasp the world and to come with him on a mental adventure.
Yes. I think it's time to go to the questions from the audience. And Meher, are you there with questions?
Yes, very much so, Mr. Dharker. I'm right here, and we have a whole bunch of questions.
Good. So,
right, we've had a lot of people writing in. We've had a very tough time picking some of the questions. So we have about 8-10 questions. Let's see how many we can try and finish in the next 15 minutes. Our very first question is from Vidya Mishra, who asks, do writers tend to be natural atheists? Is it difficult for them to subscribe to any organized institution in general because perhaps they can see beyond?
My view of the novel is that it is at heart a secular form. It's very difficult to write a novel in which there's a deus ex machina guiding your plots. And I think one of the reasons why I've never been much of a fan of Graham Greene is precisely for this reason. If you have a guide, a supernatural force, really the interest goes out of it. The rich possibilities of humans, either by accident or design, making their own fates is lost to us if you have a godhead guiding results or offering punishments or rewards in an afterlife. Others may take a very different view, but certainly in the British English tradition of the novel, it came, rose to first prominence in the 18th century, especially with post-English Enlightenment, and it had its first vitality, I think, in a godless world. So that's the place I inhabit.
Right. Our second question is, with the range of writing you have done, what kind of reading or research do you do? For example, in your book, The Children's Act, which was about a Jehovah's Witness, there is a constant struggle between the practical and the spiritual. Now, is this something reflective of the time and your personal struggles of your writing?
Well, I have to declare myself I am an atheist. I don't struggle with it anymore. But I try to be as respectful as possible to some quite extreme religious points of view. Parents who would deny their children blood transfusion at the cost of their lives, for example, would seem to be a very extreme position. My research for that was to go to some Jehovah's Witness service. And also, amazingly enough, while I was writing the novel, they were knocking on my door on 3 occasions. So I would go out and, for the first time, instead of saying, no, sorry, good luck, but can't talk with you today, I engaged with them to ask them if they really felt that it was right to deny a little girl a pint of blood if it would save her life, and listen to their reply. And it was very, very sincere. Yes, and the reason for that, as they said to me, is you think death is the end of things, but we think it's the beginning. And that child will go properly to heaven. So I became very interested in that conviction, often from very good-hearted and kindly people. These were not bad people at all. And I wanted really to put that over in what happens when that kind of conviction meets the secular certainties of the family court, whose only interest is what is the best for the well-being of this child.
Right. Our next question is ecological imperialism and climate change. They're both contrary to each other. How do you view this contradiction, and what is your experience of the novel Solar?
Well, absolutely. Terrorism, frightening or killing other people for your cause, will not serve the planet, its creatures, or its weather, or its future. So I agree, they're antithetical. But I certainly agree, and I'm very much heartened seeing the streets of New York or London or wherever filled with young people saying, we want some action. We want to take this. We want you to take, the people who are in charge, to take this more seriously and forget the bottom line and your profits, and fundamentally do this very simple thing, which is find sources of energy to run our civilization that does not involve burning fossil fuels. My experience in writing Solar, my climate change novel, it was very difficult because to me it seemed so obvious that, that we have a problem, we need to solve it, that in the end I had to get a character who was not on board. Like many people are not. It's much more interesting to confront the people who resist doing anything for a whole range of reasons. And I also was interested in the conflict between our immense cleverness, fantastic cleverness, technological cleverness, and our immense stupidity in the face of an obvious pressing need to act together to solve something. And all of that I poured into this character. Fat, greedy, stupid, clever Henry Beard. Michael Beard, sorry.
Right. Now, what made you opt for psychoanalysis as a tool of your writings? And have you ever found yourself relating to a character?
I didn't get that a bit about psychoanalysis.
Jayashree Lalla asks, what made you opt for psychoanalysis as a tool of your writings?
Oh, I see what you mean. Well, I think the novel is a great instrument of psychoanalysis, or certainly of exploring the human condition, of trying to find a kind of mirror to hold up to what we are. As for psychoanalysis itself, I'm fairly skeptical. I don't think it's ever cured anyone of anything, but I think it's a lovely indulgence for those who can afford it. So trying to understand other minds, I think, is the central task of novelists. Trying to understand this particular point in history, in modernity that we find ourselves, that's also central to the task, and that's why, again, it was useful to think of that Bellow quotation.
Right. Have you ever found yourself relating to any of your characters?
Oh, of Of course. I mean, what else could I do? They are, well, as Flaubert famously said of Madame Bovary, c'est moi. I mean, all my characters are some kind of side of myself, or even a fantasized side of myself that I'm trying to run away from. Yes, I mean, they are. Every cell of my body is in those characters.
Tanya James asks, in your book of short stories, Between the Sheets, there was a fabulous story of a young man falling deeply in love with a mannequin. Was Machines Like Us a link to that story somewhere?
That's a very interesting question. Yes. I mean, that story, it was called Dead as They Come, was a satirical story about masculine sexuality, and man takes his mannequin home, has an intense relationship with it, and sooner or later becomes jealous that she's having an affair with the chauffeur, his chauffeur. But the idea of an inert creature onto which we project ourselves has remained with me. I mean, that story is almost 50 years old, so it's a long time for something to linger. But yes, she or he, I don't know who asked the question, makes a very good connection. Yeah, a very good connection.
Right. Arman Kapoor asks, what compelled you to write Enduring Love and Sweet Tooth? And what for you is the essence of a good suspense or a good thriller?
Well, Kingsley Amis, the English novelist, said that he was not interested in any novel that didn't start a shot rang out. I mean, he's been very satirical. And I had that light-hearted remark at the beginning of Enduring Love. I thought, what would it be like to really hit the ground running with a disaster and an attempt to rescue a balloon that's being blown away and a child is threatened, is in the basket, and a man dies because they did not all collaborate. And what lay behind Enduring Love was a wish to investigate and maybe sort of argue with this notion that we inherit from romantic fiction that intuition is the great guide to situations and problems. I wanted to say, let's have a warm-blooded celebration of rationality. So this was my go at that. What was the other novel invoked? Arman
asks, what, according to you, is the essence of a great thriller or a great suspense novel?
Well, a great suspense novel should be good at arousing curiosity at every stage. And in fact, I could expand that to say that should be the case with all novels. Henry James famously wrote, the first duty of the novelist is to be interesting. Well, of course, that begs a million questions. But certainly the first duty of the thriller should be to keep the writer in a state of total curiosity by the constant withholding of the right amount of information by the writer. And it's a sort of dialogue between reader and writer, holding things back in order to keep someone turning the pages.
We have a question from one of our viewers called The Mind School, and they ask, does writing a psychological novel take an emotional toll on you? And how do you unwind and get started with your next novel?
Well, there's no question that one's mood state as a novelist is caught up with what you're doing, but it's not the material itself. It's whether you're making progress and a good fist of it, whether you're succeeding or not. And often you feel, or I feel, I speak for myself here, I only feel as good as my last page. If you're beginning to flounder and you know you're going to have to go back and scrap what you've done the last week, it really does have a bad effect on on one's sense of self. The material itself, I could write the darkest scene. If I'm getting it right, I can come away with a real spring in my step. And as for recreation, well, reading, tennis now, not squash, was discussed. Some of the best times of my life are not going to the theatre or reading books, but sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of wine with friends. And this is what I miss most vividly now at the moment during our lockdowns and COVID problems. But yes, the pleasure of cooking a meal for friends. My friend Christopher Hitchens, the late Christopher Hitchens, said that his true notion of happiness was to work all day on his own in the anticipation of spending the evening with interesting people. And I think that was well put.
Great. A huge thank you to Mr. Dharker and Mr. McEwan. That was an amazing exchange. Thank you so much for sharing all your thoughts and for answering so many questions. That was an amazing talk. Thank you both very, very much for being a part of this.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you both very much. That concludes our opening ceremony as well as the very first event of Tata Literature Live 2020. Our next session is Lay of the Land, the launch of the book, The Battle of Belonging, followed by a discussion about what nationalism really means with Christophe Jaffrelot and Dr. Shashi Tharoor, chaired by Gargi Rawat at 7:45 Indian Standard Time. Followed by The Unquiet American, the politics and economics of US foreign intervention, with Michael Hudson and Vijay Prasad, chaired by Suhasini Haider. That's happening at 9 p.m. tonight. So do definitely remember to log into those sessions as well. And of course, we have an entire week ahead of us, lined with some fantastic sessions. You can check out the schedule and the speakers online on our website. You can also buy the books we talked about from our bookstore partner, Tata Click. Huge thank you to our title sponsor, Tata, and our co-sponsors, Tata Steel and Tata Projects. The festival's social media handle is across all our social media networks, the same one, @Tata Lit Live. It's on all our networks. And thank you so much for being such an important part of Tata Literature Live 2020. You've been a fantastic audience so far. We've had some wonderful questions, and definitely stay tuned and logged in to all of our next sessions. So stay safe and stay online. See you guys.
It's 3 years, very good years. And then I went to the University of Glasgow and became part of the academic staff. And yeah, I came back to India. But while I was in Glasgow, I wrote my first article for the Scotsman. And
did you?
And that's how I started writing.
Right. Well, my father was born in Glasgow, and my wife, Annalena, her parents were from Glasgow. And we spend a lot of time in Scotland when we're free to travel, especially the Northwest, which is so beautiful.
Right.
Anyway, thank you very much for the conversation.
Great talking to you. And
real pleasure. Thank you very much. And,
thank you. Bye.
Great. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Goodbye. Thank you all.
Bye. Have a nice day.
Thank you.